welcome and hello. Since we're on Facebook right now, we have a few more minutes. Till class officially starts. Still be letting people in. This should be the final class, theoretically. So.
Your beard is getting long.
Yeah, this is long. I trim the sides, throwing off my balance. So, how's your arm doing, Carol?
It's doing well. I'm doing my exercises. I'm getting there.
You're muted, but I assume everything you're saying it's going great.
And it is.
Unless I'm muted. Okay, now go ahead, talk now. I might have been muted.
No, I'm not muted.
No, you're good. I might have had my volume down, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes. No, going well. Go back to the doctor next week.
Okay, that's good. Very good. Another minute or so, and then we will get kicking. What's that? I'm not mute myself. I'm gonna mute myself real quick. Hold on. So, still watching that go. Let's see. Okay, my thing says 7 o'clock. So we'll go ahead and we'll jump in, even though other people will possibly, potentially hop in after we start. So hopefully, since this is the last class, I hope you all have your 1,000-word essays ready to turn in at the end of class for your official grade. I want everybody to pass, but I can't guarantee anything. So, all right, so I have a dog walking by me. All right, fantastic. So let's see here. So chapters 8 and 9. So for those of you who weren't with us last week, we were on theoretically on chapter 7 and 8. We made it through 7. So whether that was preordained or that's what happened, we made it through chapter 7 last week. So this week we have chapters 8 and 9. So it's part of your responsibility as well that if I get bogged down in chapter 8, to raise a hand, to send a message in the chat, to do whatever and say, hey, buddy boy, you need to pay attention to the clock and move along. So chapter number 8 has the title of Success. And with that title of Success, it kind of gets into a little bit of things we had been talking about in what we've been talking about in the past, how we discussed, like he shares all of these success stories, and what about the ones that, that the failures and all of that. And so this chapter kind of delves into that a little bit. But so does anybody have anything? So theoretically, I can just go through the chapter. It's the last class. I always like the classes more when you guys talk more and I can react. One, it makes it easier for me. It's less work on my part. But then two, I've read the book. I know what I think about the book. I don't have to, I mean, as much as I love seeing all of your faces on Zoom, I don't like to go over the book. I don't need to do this because I know I read it. I know what I think. I want to hear what you guys think. So, chapter 8, success. Is there anything from this chapter, any talking points, any stories that anybody would like to highlight to get started with? Don't all volunteer at once. You can put it in the chat. I'm not monitoring. Are you monitoring Facebook? Okay.
I think the one thing when he said we are not called to be successful, but to be faithful.
Right. So he quotes that according to legend, or whether she actually said it, either way, it doesn't matter. It quotes that Mother Teresa, page 167, that Mother Teresa's take, we are not called to be successful, but faithful. So I have a pastor friend. I have several pastor friends, but I have one in particular pastor friend who, I want to say 7-8 years ago, we were having a meeting and that quote came up. And he said, I don't agree with that. I think that's missing. It's letting ourselves off the hook, or it's missing the point. So either Diane or anybody else, what is the difference? What is what Mother Teresa or what Father Gregory, as he's quoting this, what is the point they're trying to make when they're saying it's about being faithful, not about being successful? And anybody can answer, but I'm just throwing it back out.
In this perspective, it would be you're leaving success up to God, and we're just supposed to do our part. But and your pastor friend, I'd be curious as to why he took issue with it, because I could kind of picture, like, if you're being faithful, not that you always are going to see the fruits of the seeds that you might plant, but I would suspect sometimes you do. And so yeah. I would be curious to say, if you never saw any fruit ever, right, I'd be questioning whether or not you are actually doing what you're supposed to be doing. But I agree, you don't always see it.
Right. Yeah. And so for the other pastor, we were discussing, what pastors typically discussing ministries, different things together, church life, and his reflection on it was, from my understanding at least, was if, when we put that out there all the time, it's our job to be faithful and not successful, or our calling, then he felt it was kind of in a manner almost like allowing ourselves to, like you said, Rob, to never, we should see certain things develop, or we hope to see things move in a certain direction. And he felt like that we kind of let ourselves off the hook of having to actually be productive, having to actually produce any kind of results, because we're not worried about results. So do you think that quote is talking about is focusing on results, or what do you think the focus is? That's for anybody again. So I'll say this. So last week, one of the things that came out of it that seemed to be a common thread as we talked was this idea about, shifting our focus from ourselves and shifting our focus to God, which is always a good thing. And so this, if we're saying we're called to be faithful and not successful, and Rob kind of said something to this a little bit, where is our focus when we're thinking about being faithful as opposed to being successful?
Well, when you're faithful, you keep going and you accept all views or challenges or anything that's brought to you. If you're successful, you have a goal in mind, and the only way you think you've attained it is if it happens and your goal has been met. Right.
I agree. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that, or no?
I tend to think that in the American culture, we're imbued with this term success, and there are definitions of what all that is. And when you take that and sort of try to impose that on a theological sense or a biblical sense, that's a hard step, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so. I mean, he discusses it further, you know, in the following pages. But there's, I mean, it's in story after story after story. If you were evaluating the lives, which I think is wrong anyway, but I'm putting in there just for the purpose of this. If you're evaluating the stories and the different gang members that Father Greg interacted with, when we talk about those, you know, who would be successful from a cultural standpoint? My thought is the successful people would be the ones that worked, that eventually kept either working and worked their way up at Homeboy Industries and now like managing things, or they were able to make it into a job outside of that. And, you know, established a family and, you know, all these American dream kind of things. But what happens when we've talked time and time again of these, any of these individuals who did make a change, but then at some point in the future, whether very soon, or pretty quick after they make a change in their lives, or months later when they're killed, are those success stories too, or no?
I think that Chuck was on something with regard to our definition of success.
Yeah.
So I would say if we define it as a very American, you know, centric kind of view, I would say no, you know, because you do think of success as, you know, when you just say that word, people think of monetary or status or power or whatever it might be. But if we take and redefine it as God's, or something is more aligned with maybe God's definition of success, which has nothing to do with any of those. In that case, I would say that those folks, that even though they turned the corner and they made a life that was different and they were, you know, following what God, you know, they believed was, you know, the plan for them. And then 3 months later, they still ended up getting shot, you know, to some random violence act that occurred. I would say in that case, it is still successful, but only if we are willing to accept that change in definition.
Right. So when we, so when it's talking about, you know, or does anybody have, let me put it this way, does anybody have an example? And I'm trying to think of one myself. So if nobody has one, that's fine. I was like, man, if I ask this question, usually I don't like to ask questions that I don't have some kind of idea of, like, I can give an answer to if I have to. I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot. And that's what I'm like, I don't know. Does anybody have their own story of a time when they felt in their life that they followed that calling, you know, as Diane brought up, they followed that calling to be faithful, but it didn't necessarily result in success by the way the world defines it? Does anybody have an example of a time that happened? And I can think of one now. So I figured if I talked long enough, God usually whispers something into my head. Does anybody have any stories, any experiences?
I guess I would say that we're all on a really twisty, turny path. And when you're at any point in the path, you can't see really what the next turn is. That's the faithful part, that you will continue and things will be okay. But if you pick any one point in somebody's life and say, are they successful? Well, they might be not particularly at one turn, and then right around the corner is the thing that they can't see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in that sense, Kathy, it's almost like the image coming to me is like this idea that faith implies future, like there's still more to come. And success implies that there was something set, it was either reached or it wasn't reached. And then you evaluate it, which, I mean, makes sense for a lot of things. Sue, you were saying something too, I think.
Yes, I was thinking in terms of a congregation. that we are called to. And the community was expected to grow vastly. And so, in preparation, our congregation felt it was wise to call a second pastor and an assistant pastor to be prepared for the numbers that would be coming in. Well, the community did grow. The church itself did not grow nearly like it was expected to grow in numbers. However, during that time, amazing things happened to that congregation as far as its faith and its dependence on God for guidance.
Yeah.
That was, I think, overall, the thought was not about growth in faith. It was all about numbers.
Yeah. Right. In congregations, Sue points out, and that's one of the things I always have to keep in the back of my mind is a lot of my references or my examples or what have you, they're all tied to congregational stuff because that's where my life is, outside of like family and kids. But the congregations definitely, I know we definitely get into those kind of modes. Faith, I think inherently faith is very risky in one sense because because we only control up to a certain point and then the rest of it is completely out of our hands, which I think is life anyway. We like to lie to ourselves and like to think that we're in way more control than we are. How does focusing on faith as opposed to success, he kind of hints about this in the chapter, how does focusing on faith as opposed to success help us deal with setbacks or missteps, whether, in our own personal lives or in the lives of the congregation and in our work lives or family lives?
I'm taken aback a little bit by the fact that for 10 years we hosted homeless families.
Mm-hmm.
And by all sort of the American standard, these families were not successful.
Right.
The vast majority of them were just flat out dysfunctional.
Right.
But and when they left, we never really knew were they successful, but many of them had a faith that once they got past this, that's what got a lot of them through. It wasn't us per se. We provided shelter and some friendship and a few other things, but it just struck me there's a parallel here because in this book, except for a few guys that get shot, you don't really know all these characters. They go back to, I don't even know how you get through gangland to get to the Homeboy Industries and what do you have to do to get home and how you do that. Right. But the same was true of a lot of the families that we hosted, because we hosted an awful lot in a 10-year period.
Right.
Who had a faith in maybe just a hope.
Yeah.
That things were just going to get better.
Yeah. No, Chuck, and those were the two examples that came to my mind. And I have two people here that represent that were leaders in these two things. One is was Family Promise, what Chuck was just referencing. And whether you look at it from the family's perspectives or you look at it from the congregations that participated in it, were they successful? It depends on how you measure it. But they, they're faithful in that what they were doing, but they did what they were able to do, and that there was that faith and hope that something good was going to come from it, at least in that day. And the other, when looking at worldly success, with Rob, with Appalachian Service Project, that we participated in, that's, if you were to look a lot of those families culturally comparative to our living standards up here, we would say, man, they're not successful. They don't have, whether it's vehicles or their housing or their income. But we would always kind of walk away, at least I know I did walk away with, there were areas in their life that they were successful in the sense that they had really strong family connections. They had a really strong faith life. They had a really strong sense of community. So I think that's a really great thing for that faith to keep that up there. It doesn't mean that we will never see successes, but it just means that it's not a scoreboard. Like that's not why we do it. All right, Judy put, faith allows us to see success of even minor changes. Yeah, I would agree. So another example I can give, and then I'll move on, is I won't even know if I would consider this a success, or I don't even know how I would phrase this. But when 2-3 years ago, when I did the wedding for someone who, when I was on internship, they were in confirmation. So back in 2005, they were in confirmation where I was serving. And then a couple of years ago, they reached out to me and said, hey, will you do the wedding? And I hadn't talked to this individual in 13, 14 years, and when I finally did, they said, oh, I was just kind of envisioned that you would do the wedding. That's I connected with you. And that's, now at the time, if you would have told me, if you would have said, look at this 8th grader, this 14-year-old, do you think this 14-year-old likes you? Are they nice to you? Do you think that they're going to want you involved in life? I'd have been like, no, these kids are horrible. They're all horrible. And I've learned to realize that their horribleness is beautiful in a different way. But, at that time, I would not have, thought that there was any kind of connection made. And now that was just one kid out of, 10. But do I look at that and say, well, then there was some kind of connection made, something worked, because you need a little bit of the success too. You need good things sometimes too, because if not, it can be backbreaking. All right. Moving forward, does anybody else have anything in chapter 8? I'm looking through it as well. I have things, but I don't want to put anything out there. I'll let you guys do that as well. All right, I'm going to point something out, and then I'm going to make you guys talk about it. So we'll turn the tables a little bit. Page 171. 170, 171. So he's going over just, the success or a lot of the failures. And he's talking to Freddie. He says, this is, I think, the bottom of 170. All of us here are drowning. And you just reach in and you sweep us up. And then he says to Father Greg, I swear to you, if someone offered me a choice right now of $1 million or a chance to swoop you up, I would swoop you up. To which Father Greg responds, you just did. You just did. Was Freddie able to take away all the pain that Father Greg was experiencing? No. But when Father Greg responds, you just did, what is he alluding to?
Well, the fact that Freddie's really giving him the love back and acknowledgement for what he's been doing for him.
Yeah.
That is more than any dollar amount or anything can give him. That's Father Greg's purpose of what he's been doing all along for these people. So
yeah, I love that, Dale. And that's that sense that amidst all of the different successes and failures, different things, the thing that happens, the reason it all exists, you know, on a human level, is for those connections and that loving and just being with people. And so in that following paragraph, it says, Sister Elaine Roulette, the founder of My Mother's House in New York, was asked, how do you work with the poor? I love this response. She answered, you don't. You share your life with the poor. It's as basic as crying together. It is about casting your lot before it ever becomes about changing their lot. So, and I think in those two, and I'd like to hear other examples in your lives that you guys have experienced in those. I'll give you some time to think as I'm sharing these examples. In those two things I talked about earlier, Family Promise and Appalachian Service Project, we knew, or I knew in my experience with Family Promise was, I knew when I left in the morning or at night or whatever, I had not solved their housing situation. I had not ensured that they're going to have a job or food every day. But it wasn't about that. It was about being there with them. And, you know, and watching, I'll never, you know, so many memories of Chuck making balloons, blowing up balloons, and, you know, kids riding bikes in the parking lot. Just, you know, so many other stories, and of other people doing things as well. And the same thing with Appalachian Service Project. It wasn't about, it was about going and helping with their housing, but it was about more than that. It was about connecting with people. It wasn't like total home makeover or anything. We're going to put you guys out for a week and we're going to fix your house. It was about, you know, just being there with the people. So has anybody had a situation where you felt like you were doing something? Maybe you went in to do one thing, but really you learned that the fulfilling part was just being there with whoever you were interacting with. Got Barb said something. Connections, which came home. That's right, Barb. That's great. I want to hear about you, though. I want to hear about you, Barb. I can tell she's tisking me, even though I can't see her.
Before I came to Ohio, I taught in Missouri, and it was a 50% turnover. And there were a lot of kids, you know, that didn't speak English and whatever. And I mean, you just do the littlest thing for them, and they just appreciated it.
Mm.
You know, you would bring in popsicles on a hot day, and it's like you gave them something worthy of them.
Yeah. Something that made them feel what? Like you what?
That successful, that a belonging.
Yeah, I think that's the big part, that belonging. It made them feel like you cared for them.
Right.
You did something that you didn't need to do, but that you were thinking of them. And that's the thing. I think thinking of people outside of the time when they're just right in front of you. You know, when someone's on your mind, when someone's in your heart, and you just, I have to, you know, I'm thinking about what they're going through and how can I make their life better. That's a big thing, and that's one of the things with when I'm teaching. What I've come to realize is the kids are actually really, they are moved much more about just knowing that you actually care about them than almost anything else like that. And you'd think, like, because they'll push you away, and you think that they wouldn't care, but there's something about that. All right, it's dance time. It happens every week, and everybody, we're gonna hustle. We're gonna do the hustle. All right, so hope you guys brought your dancing shoes. All right, so Barb put, for me, it was working at church with Family Promise. Yeah, bonding with the families, Chuck and the group. Yeah. And you have to, does anybody have an example of a time when you had to accept the reality that maybe you thought you were going to change the world, or you were going to change something and make it this, and you were going to end up with a successful result? and however you define success, but then you had to walk away at some point and realize that, you know, I did what I could do. It maybe didn't live up to these grandiose ideas I had, but that I did this, and this is what God was actually asking me to do. That served just as much of an importance as, you know, anything else. Does anybody ever had something like that where they've had to readjust and realize, yeah, I think we still accomplished something? You have. Don't lie to me. Don't you sit there and look at me and lie to me. I don't ask questions that don't have answers. I know you have.
Yeah,
Yeah. Go ahead, Kathy.
I have one. There is a young woman in Brooklyn who I've been the mentor for through Big
Yeah.
Brothers and Big Sisters for the past 20 years. And about 3 years ago, it became clear that she was schizophrenic and there was just nothing I could do to help her. And I can barely talk about it without crying.
Yeah.
But there were so many moments from 6th grade to young adulthood where I stood with her.
Yeah.
No matter what the final outcome, and we don't even know what that is yet. There's
Yeah.
turn in the road, and you don't know what's ahead. Anyway, sorry for the tears, but
No,
it really
no.
is.
No, that's absolutely.
Realizing
great.
your limitations is quite difficult. So
Yeah. And I think that's with, I mean, I think it applies to ministries, it applies to working with people, applies to family members, when realizing that you can only do, and not even because they're unwilling to accept it, but there's certain things that are out of our control, and we can only do things, and then we just have to trust. I mean, obviously the easy example on what you were saying, Kathy, it applies to, with if, having kids and just praying, trying your best and hoping everything turns out right. And you start, I know I did, at least. I didn't even know what to, I don't think any of us do, but I didn't really necessarily know what to think, when Melissa and I decided, yeah, we think we should have a kid. And, we had Grace, and then 5 years later had Ben. And it was, we start off with these hopes and these dreams and these visions. Like, this is what's in 20 years, this is what their lives are going to look like. And, realizing how much you have to adjust on the fly constantly. You still love, but some things are definitely more trying. And I would say, for being a parent, for being somebody, if you care about something or a situation, I think that success and faith comment is so crucial. If you care about someone or something, it's about having faith and being faithful in your pursuit of it, more so than it is about you being successful. Because faithfulness also, in my mind right now, what's coming to me is, an idea of perseverance and stick-to-itiveness, of like just a commitment. I'm gonna be there with you, and I don't know what it's going to be in the end, but I'm gonna be there with you. I want to say, for some of you, and I'm not trying to make anybody cry here, so you can always turn off your camera or send me a direct chat message that you're mad at me, and that's okay. But in my experience as a pastor, that's one of those areas where I think if people have the ability to be around a loved one when they know their loved one's going to pass away, and it's every action's been taken that can be taken, there's like a deeper, I won't say truer, but there's like a rawer sense of love in those moments, because all of the doing goes away. And you realize what you have is just being there with one another. And that's extremely powerful. And it's, and I can see that all the time. And Melissa, my wife, works for a funeral home. We could know, this could be your last moment. This could be your last day. And I can tell myself that over and over again. And I still get pulled in all the same garbage and traps and trivial stuff that doesn't matter. but yeah, in those moments that it's kind of like, I don't say a completion, but you realized you walked with somebody, you were present with somebody until you couldn't be anymore. All right, I'm looking at things. Thank you, Sue. And I just want to tell everybody here, Sue had sent me an email last week after class, and kind of got buried, and it was an amazing email. And I want to say thank you, Sue, to everybody who's here, just acknowledging it. It really, it spoke to me and it made me smile. All right. So one of the things they talks about here back on that same page on 171 and 172, I think, going forward a little bit, so then we'll move forward, is Jesus kind of at the bottom of 171. The strategy and stance of Jesus was consistent in that it was always out of step with the world. Jesus defied all the categories upon the world in which the world insisted. So I like to define things as good or evil, as a success or a failure, as pure as impure, as good or bad. And Jesus just kind of goes, yeah, I'm just with the person. It's not about I'm with them when they're good or when they're bad or when they're evil or when they're a blessing to others. It's not about any of those definitions. Let's see here. Yeah, Jesus. All right, I'm moving forward and I have stuff highlighted in my book, which doesn't mean it's the same stuff that's highlighted in your book. And if you took a book from the library, hopefully you didn't highlight it. And if you did, I'm sure Jesus will forgive you. Let's see. All right, I want comments on this. Page 177. It's a huge paragraph. And the paragraph starts off with, if we choose to stand in the right place. I want you to move down a few more sentences below that for a sentence that starts off with, for no amount. And I'm going to read this and I want people to comment on it. For no amount of our screaming at the people in charge to change things can change them. The margins don't get erased by simply insisting that the powers that be erase them. The trickle-down theory doesn't really work here. The powers bent on waging war against the poor and the young and the other will only be moved to kinship when they observe it. Only when we can see a community where the outcast is valued and appreciated will we abandon the values that seek to exclude. So to quickly summarize, we can't just yell at other people to make things happen. We have to be the ones to do it. What are there areas within the church that you've either seen through prior experience, that you've seen at other churches, in our congregation, where you feel like areas that we've maybe from time to time said, wow, I really wish somebody would do something about this. I really wish we would, those people over in that other pew really need to behave, or we need to take this stance. Are there any issues that you've seen throughout your life where you've thought, man, I really wish somebody would do something about this? And whether you eventually made a decision to take a stand yourself, or whether you decided, no, I'm going to hang back because I don't want to make waves, or I don't want to do anything. Are there any of those kinds of things that have happened in your life? If we had more classes after this, I would have found a sound effect of crickets chirping, and I would play it every time. Even though I realized I had a study for teaching that said something like you should give people 10 seconds, at least 10 seconds to think about, which is hard for me because I think as I talk. So when somebody asks me a question, I just start answering, and I'm like, I'm going to find the answer at some point. And I realize a lot of people are like, no, I actually want to know what I'm going to say before I say it. So it's just a different way of processing. So any issues or any things that you feel that you've either witnessed or that you're still holding on to now, I can share if I have to, but I'd rather not.
Actually, what I just
Yeah, that was nice. Melissa found that. Yeah.
that was
Rob.
No, I was just thinking there's actually what you were describing there where you think, why don't they do something about it?
Yeah.
There's actually a contemporary Christian song it's just on the radio occasionally where that's the whole song. It's actually talking about that. He starts out by saying, he reads the newspaper, he sees something on the news, and he's like, God, why don't you do something about that? And he kind of shakes his finger at God. And then later in the song, the answer is, I did. I made you. So.
Right. It makes you think. There's a great line in the movie Evan Almighty, or a great scene if you've ever seen it. So it's the premise. If you haven't seen Evan Almighty or Bruce Almighty, you have two different characters who get to interact with God, and Bruce Almighty gets to become God for like a week. And Evan Almighty, he kind of becomes like the Noah figure. And in Evan Almighty, there's a great thing where she doesn't know she's talking to God, but Evan's wife is with her kids and they're at a restaurant and she's talking to God, who she thinks is just like somebody who cleans the tables at the restaurant. And God says to her something to the effect of, when you pray for more time to spend with your family, that you wish your family had spent more time together, does God make your family spend more time together, or does God give you opportunities for your family? Like if you're saying you want to be able to work with this kind of person, or have this kind of change in your life, does God just change it, or does God give you opportunities and chances to go like, yep, I'm going to live into this? Because we'd much rather have the first, like what Rob was saying in the song. We'd much rather be like, God, just take care of this. And God, I think God does respond the other way. So any things that we see, because I will raise one. It's the last class. Doesn't matter if I get in trouble. If you guys agree with it or not. I have the courage of the computer screen. Now I know what all these social media commentators or whatever, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Melissa's like, I'm not listening to you. All right, anybody? Anyone?
I think getting back to this even leads to the whole success thing.
Yeah.
I think people are reluctant if they have ideas to oh wow, like in the church or whatever. I think this should be done, and I think they're reluctant and hold back a lot of times because they're not going to be successful, or you're going to be a committee of 2 or 3 and it's a big project, and then it just kind of falls apart. So it's safer to stand back and say, well, I thought I might suggest that, but it's never going to work out,
Yeah. No, that's very applicable. What I'm thinking also for myself in my own life, how many times have I been in situations where, let's say somebody else around me has made an off-color comment on a variety, and you name anyone. I have the kind of face, apparently, that people think I believe whatever they believe. I don't know what it is. And so I'll go in somewhere, someone will start talking to me and they'll be like, well, you know how those women are. And I'm like, whoa, apparently there's something about this that says I share your opinion about X group. And how many times in my life have I listened to somebody say something and not said, hey, I don't agree with that. If that's your opinion, that's your opinion, but don't peddle that around me. Don't think you're going to find support from me. More times than I care, that I would hope to have happened if it's happened to me. And that happens with church stuff. Like Dale and Becky decided they wanted everybody to wear red checkered outfits tonight. And We should have all done it. If I had known, if you'd given me an email half hour ago, I would have figured it out.
I forgot to send that out. Sorry.
You did forget to send that out. It's in your draft box. Yeah. Yeah. If we had a commercial break, yeah. I have a pair of pants that are red checkered. I don't know if I have a shirt. The other ones I'll put out there, and I started preaching on them a little bit more over the last several months. One of the things that weighs on me a lot more now are, when I think of the future of the church, and I don't mean 5 years from now, I mean 20, 30, 40 years from now, the next generation, of listening to our youth and saying, what are the issues that are important to you? Or looking at getting people from the outside world wanting to be a part of the church. I think there can be some confusion with saying like, well, but we're not of the world, we're this, and like, that's great. But as I've said before, and I'm not the only one to say it, if we read the Gospels, we see Jesus definitely spent a lot of time praying by himself. He spent time in the synagogue. He discussed things with religious leaders, but his ministry was outside in the world. I mean, it constantly interacting with people, and engaging them wherever they were. So, this is your issue? Okay, well, let's talk about that. And I feel like the church has, myself included, tried to dictate these are the important issues too much, as opposed to listening to what's going on in the world and saying like, okay, how can we walk with you in this? We've tried to say, no, this is what's important. And I think for the younger generations, they're going, yeah, we don't really care about that. And if they don't have a sense of social obligation to have to go to church. They don't. But that's another soapbox. I'm going to move to chapter. I'm going to keep going. Let's see here. Ooh, crap. Sorry, I even said that. All right. Page 178. I know. I'm sorry, Melissa. It surprised me again. The bottom of 178. Jesus jostled irreparably the purity code of the shot callers of his day. He recognized that it was precisely this code that kept folks from kinship. So saying that you have to be this way, you have to be that way is what kept people, this arbitrary code. Maybe success has become the new purity code. That's how we grade things. And Jesus shows us that the desire for purity, 9 times out of 10, purity meaning success, is in fact the enemy of the gospel. That phrase, enemy of the gospel, got me. I want everybody to think of one thing. You don't have to share it. You don't have to put it in the chat if you don't want to. But I want everybody to think of one thing that you think is an enemy of the gospel. What do you think? One thing that stands in direct opposition to what Jesus was proclaiming. Take a moment to think about that. All right, does anybody have a theme, a word, a phrase, or whatever? You can write it in the chat. You can offer it. Does anybody have something that they say, you know what, I think this is an enemy of the gospel? And then what I want to do, don't tell anybody, is I want to then check to see whether that's an enemy of our culture as well, or just an enemy of the gospel.
The one word that comes to mind that popped to mind for me was pride.
Pride. Okay. How so? Say more. I'll be a college professor. Say more about that, please.
Well, I think that it can get in the way of a lot of different things. It gets in the way of people asking for help. It gets in the way of people helping others. And so it's on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah. Like what you did there with yeah, because I tend to think of pride as being like, well, I did better than you. But I like what you did there, Rob, of saying like it makes it even, going back to that old song, ain't too proud to beg, that kind of mentality. Yeah, it is both sides. So pride. Okay. All right. I got some chats. All right. Barb wrote me a thesis statement. All right. So I'm going to read. Don't write more, Barb. It kicks up the rest of my chat and then I have to keep scrolling. All right. All right. You're not being shy. Yeah, I know you're not shy. Went to a Southern Baptist church, East Cleveland, felt so welcome. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, yeah, okay. I'm going to do something with that, but I want to hold on. Kathy, I want to say I love how you put a question mark after yours. Like it's your opinion. And you were like, I don't know. Self-confidence. There we go. We'll work on that one. So she doesn't want to be too proud. That's humility. Yeah, I think for those two, and Barb, I don't know if that's what you were referencing, with your being that welcoming, yeah, the exclusion. So the church be welcoming, being a place. And all right, so I'm going to say this, and this is going to get me in trouble. I know it, but so that's okay. I won't say it about Avon Lake at the moment, but in other places where I've served for different reasons, and I might have shared this before, I'm getting old and my memory is going, that even as a pastor, I've had times where with that welcoming, where I've told people, yeah, I don't know if I'd want to welcome someone to our church. Like, I don't know if they would be welcomed at our church. I don't know how they'd be received at our church. And that is, especially as a pastor, that's, something that pained me, to think that there might be people that I associate with who I think are good people, who I would say, if you came to church and you were just kind of yourself, I don't know how well that'd go over. And I just, I don't like that, because I don't think the church should be that way. All right, so we got a new message from Kathy. All right, selfish.
I guess some of the homeboys walked in. How would that affect us?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so like if everybody at church was like, hey, all right, here's the thing. We have the May congregational meeting, which Chuck, we still have to schedule, which that's a whole nother thing. But we have the May congregation meeting, and that we need to get 100 new people. Our goal is to get 100 new members in the congregation. Let's say that somebody throws out that, which would upset me. But let's just say that's what somebody throws out. And we bring in, Carol, 100 gang members. How would that fly? Now you could say now, and Carol, I'll let you go. I don't want to say individually, because individually there's going to be somebody as a spectrum. On the whole, how do you think that would go over? And not just our congregation, at any suburban congregation. How do you think?
I think it would go over well. Maybe if they knew they were coming, that they could make them feel welcome. But if they walked in, they might have different reaction.
Right. So if someone just walked in with face tattoos.
Yeah. You might think we were getting robbed or whatever. We wouldn't.
Yeah. You might think you're getting robbed. it makes me think of like, I know this wouldn't happen with one person who passed since COVID started. I know regardless, and this is something that, and this individual, we all have our own shortcomings, but this individual that I'm going to reference, I knew I could always count on this from her. It didn't matter who walked in the building. I know Iris would give them the biggest hug in the world. They could have a huge face tattoo. They could have that was her personality. So think about the first time that you went into, whether it's a church or any other thing that you've never been to before, where there's a group of people that have already existed before you and they had some kind of connection and you went in the first time. What kind of fears were running through your mind?
Acceptance.
That you'd be accepted,
I was being judged.
that you're being judged, which you were.
Yeah.
not being mean.
No, right.
Yeah. Acceptance, judgment,
So much uncertainty.
uncertainty.
Because I've been there. I did it.
Yeah. Not sure what you're walking into.
No, you know what you had, you know what you're used to, you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah.
And are they willing to accept you?
Yeah. And that's even something that's amazing about that, Melanie, and because I know your situation, is that's even true from like going from like one ELCA church to another ELCA church.
Yep.
You can be like, oh, we're ELCA churches. And it's like, yeah, but we all have our own little flavor.
Yep.
And customs. And so do we really like, or I kind of know what to expect, but I kind of don't know what to expect. So as Barb was saying, like if we know that anybody new coming into our place, assuming that they, now if somebody came in with somebody else, or if Barb said, hey, I invited some of my friends, and then so she's there she can kind of be a buffer. But for anybody who's just entering into something on their own, and we know this is one of those fears, what should be our primary goal as followers of Jesus for the first time anybody comes into our place?
Obviously, to make them feel welcome, to take that, put ourselves in their position and how we felt when we were in a position like that.
Yeah.
Make them comfortable, make them.
Yeah.
And I've had that happen myself. It's like when you go home, then you say, gee, we should have said something to that person.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. It's just that maybe I'm shy, but it's like,
Yeah.
But I should have extended my hand and said, oh, you're new
Right.
here. What's your story? Tell me about yourself, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's because we use that, and I agree with everything you were saying, Dale. And I'm just thinking even like on our bulletins, as I'm thinking right now, is like we throw this word out there of welcome, but like, what does welcome mean? Would we all say the same thing for like, what's your definition of like someone felt welcome? I think we would have like a general consensus. Use a word, and Dale already used one, comfortable. Use another word. I want a few more words that are, you can even, if you get into a bind and you want to look up thesaurus.com and look up synonyms for welcome, but what are some other words we could use as opposed to welcome that we want someone to leave feeling what? Because in the way I'm going to tie this into the book is when Father Greg interacted with people from the first time he met somebody till whenever, if he was on his game, there were times he was off, but if he was on his game, he would want the person to feel a certain way after their interaction, that they'd walk away feeling something. So how do we want people to feel when they leave the building after a service?
That we have a kinship.
We have a kinship. Okay.
Accepted and included.
Accepted and included.
You matter.
You matter. We want you back. Yeah. Look at that. You guys all did great with that one. It only took you 6 weeks and 48 minutes.
I tend to think to Dale's comment,
Yeah.
if there's a failure, at least that I've seen over the years in our church, is that, we're afraid to go up to people because we don't know, you don't want to go up to somebody and say, geez, welcome to the church. And the guy said, I've been here for 10 years.
Right.
You don't want to do that.
People do that to me all the time, Chuck, and I'm wearing a robe. Yeah, it's crazy.
But on the other hand, when you see somebody you don't know, whether they're a member or not, or whether they just attend all the time or attend once a month, the tendency is not to go up and say that. And so when you talk about, it's a sense of they walked into church, they sat down, nobody said hello. You said, let's depart in peace, and they did.
Yeah.
And nobody said hello, really. I mean,
Oh, yeah. And
I think we do that a lot. We don't gather people in, and we don't find ways. Some churches have some of these things about shake the hand with the neighbor and back you or whatever, and you turn around and I'm looking at Dale. Well, I'm okay with that, but I don't think we do enough of that so people can come in and go out. And I realize in the Gen Z millennial framework, that's what they want. They don't really want anybody intruding on them or asking for their email address either.
Right. And there are a few things in that, Chuck. One, I would say, I would love it if the thing became about our congregation. Well, I didn't want to go back there because people were too, hey, how you doing?
Yep.
I would love that. As opposed to, nobody said anything to me. And now granted, when we go in, and my mom will laugh at this, just because I said she's going to laugh at it. So I know she will. So she's already holding one back right now or fear. No, that's you. Is when we'll go on vacation somewhere and we'll go to church, and they know now, but very early on we'd go and they'd be like, oh, we're going to tell them you're a pastor. And I go, no, I want to get into the building. I want to go to worship. I want to get out. I don't want to have to, work or do anything. And I realize that's my own baggage. But I'd much rather have somebody say, wow, those people were too, I don't even know what the word is, too engaging. And it was too much for me. As opposed to the opposite. And part of what a way to get better at this, a line that Chuck learned that he shared with me and anybody else who was listening at the time, goes back to his Army days, which I think is absolutely true for the situation. That and is it an officer on duty knows no one? Is it the officer, or what on duty knows no one?
An officer on duty knows no one.
An officer on duty knows no one. And so the meaning of that is when we get to church, and like as Chuck was just saying, when we get to church and Chuck turns around and he sees Dale, well, he knows Dale. And so he starts going, hey, Dale, what's up? Now he already knows Dale. As opposed to going like, no, my job is to be looking out for these other things, these anomalies, and so as much as I want to talk to Dale, I'll have to make sure I get a time to talk to Dale after the service or what have you. But our main concern is looking at how can we be engaging for people that are new, that, and I put this, one of my favorite stories, and I won't name who it was at our church, when I first got there and we looked at making signs for the inside of the building, and we talked about like, oh, these are the bathrooms are. And somebody was like, why do we need a sign for where the bathrooms are? I know where the bathrooms are. And I said to the person, you go to church here. Of course, you know where the bathrooms are, but I know as somebody at the time, with small children, when I go into a building, I look for where the restrooms are. I just do, because I want to know, all right, if I need something goes sideways, we have to do something. And I think our building, we've done a really good job with creating spaces for people to still be involved but if they need to walk out for a little bit with kids or what have you, they can, if they feel the need to, or if their kids are loud and I can't say, I should probably tell the congregation how much it makes me happy that I won't name any names, Marilyn, but there are certain little kids that just love to talk, and I love it. And how well the congregation does with just being like, yeah, that's great, they're here. All right, I'm going to chapter 9 because nobody said, hey, buddy boy. I'm doing it anyway. So chapter 9 is kinship. Ooh, starts off with a heavy hitter. Back to Mother Teresa. I have never read a book on Mother Teresa. I should do that. I should really do that. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills in this way. We've just forgotten that we belong to each other. That is powerful. And so then it follows up. Kinship is what happens to us when we refuse to let that happen. So let's see here. Anything from this chapter, because I'm going to keep going through mine. Anything through this chapter that's stood out to anybody? Because this is it. These are the moments. This is we're wrapping up. What's it doing? Is it a hairball? Fantastic.
On page
Mother
192,
hairball.
when it says,
I'm so sorry, Diane. I just see Kelly real quick. Hi,
Okay.
Kelly. Kelly, go back to college. What are you doing? You shouldn't be there. All right, Diane, go ahead.
on page 192, when it says the wrong idea has taken root in the world, and the idea is that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives.
Yeah. Yep. And that goes back to what we were talking about, like almost in that first class.
Yep.
There are lives that are worth less than other lives, and I think we can do that to ourselves as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's no good. Hello. Anybody else have another thing?
When they were talking about the gas tank, when they were coming home, I mean, you would think everybody would know what E and F means.
Right.
And they didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got enough. It was like, what? But if he knew, Carol, and this is an illustration for life and for ministry as well. If he knew Jojo, if he knew that E meant empty, we wouldn't have this story.
Right.
I mean, and so you think about, like, if everything just went exactly the way it was supposed to go all the time, we wouldn't have these stories that allow us to connect and and share and bring us joy. Sue, what were you going to say?
I was just thinking about this kinship idea. Desmond Tutu, but I think even more so Mandela says over and over, if we can only see the humanity in each other, it links us together. I think that's kind of what Friar Gregory was saying too, or Father agree with saying, but if we can just see how we're connected, the stories about the being way up in the skies and the fella going to the restroom and being gone for 45 minutes, and here he connected with the airline hostess and
Yeah.
shared his story, took her on a tour of Homeboy's
Oh.
industry.
Wasn't that amazing?
Yeah, the
That
way
was
we
so
can
amazing.
connect if we just take time to talk, to listen to each other.
Yeah. And I loved it because he was like, yeah, I made her cry. And
Mhm.
like his
Right.
immediate fear was like, oh my gosh, what did you do to make this woman cry?
Actually, that's why I hated this chapter.
Yeah.
It was hard to read for all the tears.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have that, and then you have the yeah, that this, do we allow people, this is like a bigger question, do we allow people to surprise us anymore? Like, so often I go into a situation just assuming I know exactly how it's going to play out, and there's usually a lot of negativity, I'm being honest, in my head of, oh man, this person's going to say this is going to go this. Like I've planned in my head for like every negative possible outcome to protect myself. And I haven't really allowed myself to be surprised. I think that's one of the reasons I love working with youth and little kids so much, because they are pure insanity and you don't know what's going to come out of their mouths next. And a lot of times it's just gibberish, but there are those moments of just absolute surprise where they touch on something. And you know, when that woman asked him on the plane, when it was a stewardess, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, when the stewardess asked him, like, he went back to go to the bathroom. His goal was to go to the bathroom, come back. He tells her a story about how the food was disgusting, you know, and then he takes her in this walk. And what did she have to be willing to do as well? I want to lift that up. What did the stewardess, the flight attendant, I don't know if that's the correct thing to say now, what did the flight attendant have to do?
She had to respect him enough to listen to him and value what he said.
Yeah.
Yep.
To want to hear somebody else's story.
Mm-hmm.
To be like, no, I could theorize, I don't know for sure, but I could theorize, were they going to have any interaction beyond that, maybe for the rest of their lives? My guess, if I had to guess, I'd say no. However, in that moment, she chose to say, hey, I want to hear your story. And in doing that, her life gets changed. I think that's an amazing lesson too, of how, you know, being willing to listen, willing to say, I value you enough to just listen to you. And once again, with people that we know, I'm going to speak for myself, with people that I know, my biggest sin is I feel like I know the people so well that I already know what they're going to say in almost any given situation. And so they start talking and I go like, all right, I already know this is going. So I already have my response ready. Or I've already tuned you out because I know I'm not going to agree with you, as opposed to listening. And my wife is recording this, and I just heard her say, I heard my wife just drop an amen while I was saying that. So, yeah, I also love that story, since we're running out of time, I love the story too about, you know, so when, what's his name? Oh boy, Bandit. So there's a guy, Bandit, somewhere around page
197.
yeah, where he calls him up and he's like, I need you to bless my, like, I need you to do this for my daughter. You have to bless my daughter. And his fear is what? And I get this as a pastor, if someone called me and said, I need you to bless my child, my fear would be something horrible has happened.
Right.
My mind goes there. Because that's the majority of the thing. And he's like, no.
He's
She's going to
scared
college.
for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he goes, and she's going to college. I need you to do this. I like the part that says, as they say, I do a long ass prayer. That's, so I would look at the story and be like, wow, that's a success story. But here's something that's just coming to me right now. And it goes back to what Chuck was saying, it goes back to everything we were saying tonight, is for all of these stories, whether they're successful or what have you, they all start out the same way, with like that first interaction of allowing something to happen, and faith and hope that something good can come from this, from our interaction. They all begin with like promise, and some of them turn out in certain ways and other ones turn out in other ways, and they don't. Father Greg can't control all of that. The people involved can't control all of it. Sometimes they make changes in their lives, they'll turn out, in different ways. But they all start off with that initial, someone saying yes to something and being willing to start that journey with somebody. And I think that's great. So I'm going through. Go ahead.
Father Greg had to feel special when it came out that he had leukemia, and so many people reached out to him.
Yeah, he probably hated it, I'm gonna be honest with you. But yes, there was a part of him that hated it, and there's another part that did make him feel special. Yeah, where I resonate with that is like I can be the center of attention. I revel in it's not an issue for me. But I only like being the center of attention when I'm controlling being the center of attention. When other people are controlling it and they're like, here, we want to put you here because we want to, it's like, ooh, I don't like that. I don't like that because I'm not in control. And I like to be the one controlling those situations. So, but being there, yeah, it's 8:15. All right. So I'm going to ask this. Is there I love the story about you'll love the way you look, that the one dude dropped his pants. And he said, there's probably some homeless guy right now who loves the way he looks in that new set of pants. That was amazing. And let's see, the super sad song it's not super sad song, pretty good, make it into a song. The super sad story about Chico, who did like the computer stuff, and then he got shot in the neck. Oh my gosh, that broke me. So here's what I'm going to end with. What I was reminded of as we went through this book is what's happened to me before when we've done this book, but I'd forgotten it. Is this book for me it starts off as a book about these other people. And as I read the book, it becomes so much more about where I see myself and these other people in this shared experience. And there's so many differences in our lives, and yet the central core things of what it means to be welcomed and loved and heard, and all of those things are universal. It doesn't matter where you come from, what your path is. We all need those things. And when we're able to actually live them out and do them, that's when I think the kingdom gets built up a little bit more each and every time that happens. Does anybody have any final comments? Not like final comments, because that would feel weird, but for the class, does anybody have any final comments?
Is Father Greg still there and working?
I believe so. I'm not on a lot of social media stuff, but he's still, like, if you put in Google, if you go to YouTube, he's got so many talks and different things, presentations. They're amazing. I think he is still going. I think he might have a little bit less of a role in some of the stuff. As Melanie put in the chat, which I agree. So like I have the hard copy, I have the copy on my Kindle, and then I have the audio copy. If you get the audio copy, Father Greg reads the book.
And it's very good. And you can download it for free from your library. That's where I got it from the
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I would just be driving in the car, and his voice
It's stunning.
so I'm like, oh man, I could listen to this guy all day. He's so good.
He has a new book out.
Yeah, he does. And maybe that'll have to be something else. Yeah. And there's a movie too called, I think it's called G-Dog or something like that. But there's a movie, it's like $3. I have not seen it yet. But it highlights the ministry there at Homeboy Industries.
But it's interesting to go Google Homeboy Industries, look at what they sell, and then look at all the affiliates right here in Cleveland that are affiliated with Homeboy Industry. It just was an interesting experience to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's turned something. I mean, from a larger scale thing, he's turned something that was just like this idea, and then starting with some gang members into this thing that has affected so many people's lives. Is the world still spiraling out of control half the time? Yeah, I think so. I don't think it's been all sunshine and puppy dogs or whatever, but the same goes for all of you. In the people's lives that he's interacted, it's changed their lives. You can't do anything about the rest of the world, but for the part of the world that he has touched, he's left it in a place where it's felt loved and heard and welcomed, and that sense of kinship. So, all right, well, I'm going to look into that new book too. I want to say thank you to all of you for journeying with me through this, and for all the conversation. It's the first time I've ever done a book study where it was like for a class that was like a book, where every time I've done a book study for a class, it came with study questions. And like you go to the end of the chapter and be like, oh, talk about this. This is the first time I didn't have that. And I'm like, I love this book, but what in the heck do we talk about? So I want to say thank you for living with that and journeying with that. And yeah, God loves you. Know that more than anything else. You have a kinship with everyone here, everyone out there, and and you are loved. So everyone have a great night, and I will talk to you soon. All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Good night. Get your red checkered shirts. Next time we meet, everyone's wearing red checkered shirts.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sue. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.